You think your orchids like being close together? We like to put them close together because it gives us that huge big punch of color. Could this be silently killing the growth and blooms of your precious orchids? In this video, we'll explain to you exactly why crowding can cause those hidden problems that will cause weakened roots and the spread of disease. And we'll show you why a little bit of spacing can make the world of difference in the growth of your plant. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to place your plant for maximum airflow, for stronger growth, for more vibrant and longer lasting flowers. Here at the Nature Company, we like to demystify the science behind orchid care so that you're not left frustrated and confused. Overcrowding is a common problem with a lot of orchid collectors, whether they've got collections that have just grown and grown and grown and their space hasn't grown with the number of orchids they have, so they've just had to slowly push them closer and closer together. Or whether it's just someone who's got a few orchids that they like to put all together so they get that big punch of color. All of these cause the same problems for your orchids, because then your orchids still have to compete with each other for all those resources that they need. And orchids require a fine balance between humidity and airflow. And overcrowding can start causing upsets in this sort of balance. And now let's look into the different problems overcrowding can cause and how to solve those problems. One of the big problems is light. As you overcrowd, so you start limiting the light available for each of the plants as they start growing in and over each other. And when we start getting uneven light on our plants, we start not only reducing the growth because they need that photosynthesis to produce food so they can keep growing well, but also uneven and irregular light conditions can then cause blooming to either abort, as in bud blast, or you get irregular and uneven blooming from your plant. And also with the overshadowing of each other, you'll often land up finding long leggy growths out of them, or growths that sort of head off at an angle towards the light. So you'll end up with a misshapen or weak plant altogether. The best ways to overcome this is to ensure almost like a layering of your plants. Put those that want more sun towards the front and those that like sort of more shadier conditions or less direct light, put those towards the back of the collection. That way you can help make sure they're all getting the correct light requirements. So spread them out a bit so that they're not all shading each other. Another big help if you've got very directional light is to keep rotating your plants. That will help make it have a more even and upright growth form and also give it a more even blooming when flowering season comes around. And with that all important air movement. Air movement is so important for orchids since they are epiphytes and they like to have air rushing through their leaves and over their roots all the time. So if you are indoors, it's very easy, especially if you start stacking your orchids close together, to provide areas where you land up with damp, stagnant air. And this is then going to cause a lot of problems with your plant. Fungus and bacteria love lots of moisture in the air, and especially if the moisture is not moving away, they're going to start attacking your plant then and there. So you need to ensure that you've got good air movement around your plants all the time. So give them enough space so that the air can move through freely, and even if you need to, make sure that you've got a little window open that's going to get a light breeze through the window, or have a fan running, not directly on it, of course, just gently blowing a light breeze through your orchids, just to ensure that the air humidity and the air movement are balanced for your orchid. If you're not doing this, you'll find your orchids are holding too much moisture, especially around those roots, and those roots need to breathe. What will happen is they'll just suffocate in all that moisture without it being able to be evaporated away. That will cause root rot. And then on your leaves, you'll end up getting those small black and darkened spots on your leaves from that fungus and that bacteria. And then what always goes hand in hand with that air movement is humidity and moisture. As we've already said, If they're overcrowded and they're holding too much moisture, you're going to get root rot and the fungus on the disease. But also, by having those leaves so closely together, you can produce small little microclimates. So even if you do have a fan that's just lightly blowing, if you don't have enough separation between your orchids, you can still get clusters of air that's holding moisture, stopping that evaporation of the water away so that you'll end up with little water droplets that will then sort of roll down into the crevices of the plant. And those little microclimates there are going to be those magnets again for that fungus and those bacteria. So you'll get things like stem rot and crown rot, all of those sorts of things when your moisture levels aren't being controlled properly. So you need to ensure that they're far enough spaced to allow for that air movement to come through properly, to allow for that evaporation of those water droplets so they're not congregating in those crevices or on the leaves. And then also what happens with overcrowding is you start landing up with some pots drying out faster than others because they're more open to the air, whereas some of the ones on the inside are not as open to the air and they may hold moisture for a lot longer. And then when you're watering all of them regularly, you'll land up really causing big troubles for those ones in the center. Those will really rot quickly because your media hasn't dried out by the time you've come to rewatering again, and then you're suffocating and rotting your roots again. Also, what can happen is as you're watering, perhaps the leaves of one orchid are covering the pot of another one and the water runs off and doesn't get into that specific pot. So you may land up with pots in the middle that are just dried out completely because they're not able to get any water because they're being covered by leaf volume or something that's moving the water in a different direction. So by just making sure your pots are evenly spaced and that the leaves aren't overlapping each other's pots, you can ensure that your plants are getting an even moisture content throughout your collection. And since we're talking about watering, and generally we feed when we water, the same problems evolve there. You've got all these leaves of all of these plants all spread out and over the top of each other. When you start feeding, those ones whose leaves are on the top are going to get the food, and that will drain the food down into their pots, whereas those other ones who are being covered up aren't going to get any food. So that's going to make their growth weaker, and since they're getting less light and probably their pots are staying wet longer, they're probably going to struggle and they'll be weaker and die off quicker than any of your other orchids. So just by ensuring that space again, you can ensure that you're giving them all an even feed at the same time. And then again, when it comes to overcrowding, you can easily land up with a weed problem. Often you can't see them because you've got so much leaf volume from your orchids that the rest of the green just is disappearing amongst a field of green. And then not only are the weeds competing for the nutrient because those roots are going in through the pot and they'll absorb the nutrients quickly, they're also going to take up space in the pot and fill up those air gaps, which are then going to cause problems for your orchids because your orchids need that air in around the roots. Also, what they do is those roots of the plants will often cause mycorrhizal fungi to flourish, the specific ones that they like, and that will help decompose your media a lot faster. And that again is going to cause problems for your orchid as the media decomposes, compacts, stops allowing air movement in. All of these we know how bad they are for your orchid. So we really have to make sure we can get the weeds out as quickly as possible. And with overcrowding, you don't necessarily see them. Also, the leaves of your weeds can slowly start overcrowding some of the leaves of your orchids, then again preventing the light to them so that your orchids are then not able to produce as much food. Also, with the extra leaf volume, will shed watering away from your pots. They'll absorb some of that water for themselves as well, and they'll slow down the air movement again, making less air movement through your pot. So you're going to have more of those fungal and bacterial problems again. So not only is it going to be weakening your plant by taking away all its resources, it's also going to be making it more susceptible to disease by keeping air and moisture in and around your plant, that's going to be problematic. And if your plants are more separated, for one, it's going to be easier to extract those weeds from your pots when you see them starting to develop. And two, you're not going to have to damage the roots of your orchid when trying to pull out the roots of these weeds, which I'm going to have to do when I do this. And talking about damaging the roots, that's also one of the big reasons that you shouldn't allow overcrowding, because those air roots or aerial roots that will shoot out from the orchid, they'll start intermingling, they'll sort of produce a little network of roots together that will then glue themselves like that. They'll then tie themselves in together, and you may have orchids rooting into your other pots. We can see how the orchids do like to produce those roots at the side of the pot, and then you start landing up with a problem like this. And when it comes to repotting, you're going to damage a lot of those roots. That's going to put more stress onto your plant again, especially now that it's been weak from being overcrowded for so long. It's going to make it more difficult for it to recover from a replant or a transplant or a repot. So as much as we can try and avoid this as possible, it's going to be important. Also because some orchids are more vigorous than other orchids, and its roots are more able to absorb that nutrient and moisture that is available, so it may start overcrowding and drowning out the other orchid in the other pot. Its roots will take up all the space, and we've heard what's going to happen with the roots of the weeds filling up the air gaps. The same will happen with the roots of the more vigorous orchid, and it can all come to a sad, sorry end afterwards if you don't rectify the problem quickly enough. And now, of course, one of the biggest problems is those pests and diseases. When your orchids are so close together, it makes it incredibly easy for mass infestations to happen, because your orchids then aren't relying on other vectors to bring those insects to them. Those little insects, especially things like aphids, mealybugs, spider mites, can just crawl across from one plant to another. You've given them nice little bridges just so they can spread through your whole collection so easily. And with them being so crowded like this, it makes it difficult for inspection to happen, because you don't have the space, and you move one, you're going to knock 10 over. So invariably you don't do all of that sort of stuff too regularly, because it just turns into a nightmare. So let me not get sidetracked again. So those little pests can become really problematic if your orchids are all touching each other, producing a nice little eco bridges for them to travel around on. And also with diseases, things like fungi and bacteria, it's going to be so much easier to spread like this, because just the touching of the one leaf that's infected to the other one can cause it to become infected too, or just by the splashing of a little bit of water. If they're so close together like this, you can infect your whole plant almost immediately just by spraying it with water and a little bit of splashing from one onto the other, and you'll land up with multiple invasion sites all over your orchid. In this way, one sick plant can infect your whole collection if they're closely packed together almost overnight. And so to avoid this, remember to ensure you're giving enough space between your orchids to break those bridges so the insects can't climb across, so that the splashes of the water aren't going to get far enough to infect your other plants, and that they're not touching, that they can't just spread the diseases that way. And also, by having them spread past or far enough apart, it makes it easier to inspect them for disease and pests, and that way you can separate the ones that are diseased or have pests on them more quickly and quarantine them in a different area, so you're not spreading it to any of your other plants. I hope this has given you enough reasons to understand why overcrowding is so bad for your orchids, and that you should do your best to give them enough space to grow and stay healthy, if not just for the longer lasting blooms, but for the health of the plants themselves. And if you need any further information on any other orchids, remember that buy me a coffee link in the description box down below. Ed posts up a lot of content there all the time. That should be your go-to resource for any of your orchid growing questions. And thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.